Welcome back to XR at Work. I'm Scott,
And I'm Dane.
and that's us. And we are excited because today we've got a guest, and we don't have to just talk to each other, Dane. We've got someone to talk to. Tell us who we're talking with today, buddy.
Yeah, so today we're talking with Chris McGlone from Abbott. Chris is the director of training and education and is doing some really exciting stuff in the space. So, Chris, I didn't do you justice. I'm going to hand it over to you to do a fuller intro.
All right, thanks, Dane. I'm honored to be introduced by you, so I do appreciate that.
Don't be too honored.
Yeah. Yes, my name is Chris. I work at Abbott. I'm an educator. I began my career as a mechanical engineer, emphasis on robotics from a school called Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Started to work in healthcare at a company called St. Jude Medical. And from there, decided to get my MBA and shift a little bit more towards the business side. So I started at my company about 15 years ago now. Been here for quite a while, and it's been great. I started a little bit in marketing, did a little bit of sales actually, which was a really great, fascinating experience. And then from there, moved more into the training and education role. So I spent a little bit of time as our manager of sales training. So first, just focused on training our sales reps. They've got to learn a lot of clinical and product information, have to learn how to understand what the customer's needs are and talking to physicians and helping them out with whatever they need. And then my current role also includes responsibilities for physician training programs. And so we connect physician faculty to other physician trainees, and they share insights, ideas, techniques, clinical data, all of that. So that's a little bit of my background and how I got here.
That's awesome. It's we've talked to quite a few people in this space, and something that always strikes me as interesting is that everybody has a different background, right? Like you have an engineering background, and I mean clearly you've done a lot of different things, but everybody in the space seems to come from different places. So it's cool to see the diversity, and I think that speaks a little bit maybe to like the human experience that XR provides, and that you kind of need everybody, right? So that's really cool. So tell us more about kind of your role within Abbott as far as the XR leader. What are some things that you guys are working on? Are there any particular technologies that you're focused on currently? Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I can remember my first XR experience. I remember we had someone come in and show us a simulation, basically. So I put on the VR goggles, and I think this was kind of a standard intro training experience to learn how to use the controllers. And I remember I was in this this trailer with this like floating robot, and it started handing me all. You guys are nodding like you've done it too.
Yeah.
And it's handing me these little cassettes that I stick into the computer, and it creates these things. And then I pick them up and I interact in that world. And I remember the physics of it. You could pick up all the junk that was in the trailer and set it down and stack stuff on top of each other. And a couple of things were really striking about that. The first was that that when I took off the goggles, that my first feeling was a little bit of disappointment that
about real life.
Yeah, real life. I was looking around. I was like, we need to paint the walls in here. And so that was kind of my first feeling, because it was so cool to be in there. But the second thing is right now, as I'm describing it to you, I'm simply describing to you my own lived memory. And I could not do the same thing with describing to you the last PowerPoint presentation that I built.
You get that right.
And so I'm not describing a training experience, or I'm simply describing like something that I did, just like I could describe to you the last time that I went to the beach or went for a hike. And so that really caught my attention for sure, but that's not the reason really that my team and I have focused on extended reality. that's a little bit of the icing, but really there's the cake underneath it, which is the actual value. And for us, it's about impacting patient lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about realizing that this technology is able to create those experiences for others, and not just playing with a robot in a trailer, but the experiences of talking to another physician colleague who's done this procedure before, and it can explain to you about, well, you got to angle your hand this way, or make sure to be looking at that vital signal. And really ultimately, by helping to advance our doctors along that learning curve, that really is where we're impacting patient lives and human lives. And so, so our group, our training and education group, got hooked a little bit. We got the fix, but realized there's a lot more to it, and there's real value here for our organization for sure, but then ultimately for the people that our doctors are serving.
But you don't get tired of that kind of initial excitement. I call it the oh shit moment, right? When people first go into VR and it's like, oh crap, this is, I mean, yeah, I still love seeing that, right? And you see it all the time. It doesn't lose its excitement, does it?
That's right. It doesn't at all. It doesn't. And it's a key part of it, is you are giving an experience to somebody.
Yeah. You know, that as you were talking through, the experience piece of that, I kind of mentioned it earlier, like when we first started the discussion, like I think the power of the XR technology is that it's so close to like what the human experience is like, and that's why it's so impactful. Like, you were mentioning, being able to remember that scenario. I went through a soft skills training early on in my, kind of VR adventure. And, I had to fire somebody. And like, this guy's not a real person. And it's been, 3 years since I did it. And I still remember the guy's name. It was Barry. And like, I think about Barry from time to time, and it's like, what a crazy technology that like you can have an impactful experience, like in a memory that sticks with you. And I think that's a lot of the value is, the experiential piece of the interaction and the emotional connection too. Like there's arguably different ways that VR, for instance, could be applied in a business. We do a bunch of manufacturing stuff. But I think the soft skill stuff is interesting too. It's different in the way that you measure success and, things like that. So I'm interested in how you guys measure, success when you're talking to a surgeon or, somebody like that. Is it an experiential thing, or are you collecting data and being able to determine proficiency based on that, or how are you guys measuring that?
Yeah.
Excellent question. You mentioned the emotional piece. That's part of learning. Mm-hmm. So for us, how do we measure success in terms of learning and education? It's advancing the user's knowledge. That's really what it is. So we initially built out an experience where it was very high end, high tech. We had this new technology that allows you to look inside an artery essentially, and you could actually see the plaque inside the artery. You could see how it's inside the arterial wall, and you can then make clinical decisions based on that. And so we wanted to create an experience for that. This was the first one that we did. And so we created this very high-end, very intense experience that was advanced. That at the end of it, if you had gone through the entire thing, you would be pretty well set to use this technology for a procedure. And we initially deployed it. And you talk about the definition of success. Well, if success is people enjoying it and saying it was cool, then it was successful. If it was getting doctors to use the technology to get better outcomes for the patients, it wasn't, because we deployed it at a trade show and we were so excited to have this new technology. We just invited anyone who was walking down the aisles to come use it.
Right.
And so of course they had a good time. They thought it was fun, but I wouldn't call it success. So since then we thought a little bit more about, well, that very question, what is success? And really it's about moving the learner through the learning curve. And this is true for all of us. We all go through phases of learning with some new technology or adopting something. So we'll start with just awareness. I get a sense of, I know this technology or this tool or this solution exists. And that's the first step. I went from not knowing it existed to it does. And I know the basics of what it is. Then from awareness, we all go through exploration, which is, all right, now that I know what it is, let me ask some challenging questions of this new process. Challenging questions of myself, like, if I were to start doing this, if I were to apply this new workflow, would it fit into my life? Would it fit into the way that I'm doing my work now? What would be the cost? How would I have to change? How would I have to relearn things that I already am expert at? And if we ultimately get through that exploration phase, we cross this decision point where we say, yes, I will learn this. So now I've gone through awareness and exploration. It's time to make a decision. I've said yes. Now I start building competency. I've got the why that justifies all this investment in learning the new technique or the new workflow or whatever. And I start to build competency. And eventually I become competent. But then there's always those who want to fully maximize something. And so they'll move from competency all the way over into mastery. So for us, when we work with doctors, we try to move them from stage to stage. And it would be pretty naive to think we could move someone from awareness to mastery. That would have to be a pretty phenomenal circumstance. Maybe you could move someone more quickly if they're a sales rep, because they work for us and that's their job. And they've already come in knowing they want to get there. But for someone who's part of a different organization, you got to move them stage by stage. And if you don't, it short circuits their learning, basically. If you try to move too fast, it's like, I don't know, you sit next to that person on the plane, a stranger, and then they're like, so are you married? Like, what are your hopes and fears? And you're like, whoa, I just met you. Like, let's go stage by stage here.
Yeah.
It can be the same thing with learning. We try to rush them through. So our definition of success has been moving them through step by step, piece by piece. So clearly defining that use case. I simply want to help them explore a new clinical topic. And that helps to then clarify, that use case clarifies what XR solution we use and how we deploy it.
I think it's cool. Like those steps that you laid out are pretty profound, I think, in the way to also think about where you introduce the technologies to people, where they are on that spectrum, if you will. Kind of depends. Like, for instance, if it's somebody's first time putting on an Oculus, then you're not going to jump into the advanced training. Like, you may have them do the training that you talked about, where you put in the cassettes into a computer, for instance. And so I'm interested in, before you even get to that point, there's like this adoption, phase that you go through as well. So where in that kind of learning, in those steps of learning that you talked about, how do you think about adoption in each of those steps, or like what's been your experience with bringing these to surgeons, for instance, and having them put on a headset? Like, are they thrilled to do it at first, or are they kind of skeptical of it, or?
Most are pretty thrilled. When we started this, a lot of it was just before and just during the pandemic. And so as the pandemic started, no one was thrilled to put on a headset that someone else had just been wearing.
Yep.
But the excitement factor is pretty attractive. And so everyone's willing to put it on and experience it. But what we've taught them is that VR is cool, but we haven't necessarily taught them to treat that patient in a better way. And so to make sure that adoption that you're talking about, I think the openness to the new solution of XR is what I've seen is it's by and large there. If you want to make an impact, that's really where the targeting of the use case is good. So we had built one, for example, that we thought would be ideal for physicians, for practicing physicians. And when we started to deploy it, we noticed that they lost interest after a little while. And basically what it was we had built a case that they could watch a procedure that another physician had recorded in the past. And they see these procedures all day long, and they don't need to watch it for 30 minutes. They need to know the highlights, this 15 seconds here when I made decision X instead of decision Y. Mm-hmm. And so we did lose a little interest there, and actually ended up cascading this VR solution a little bit more to fellows. So these are doctors who are still in training in their specialty, becoming interventional cardiologists or vascular surgeons. And those fellows are hungry for information. And so they were willing to watch the entire case. So it was the right solution for a different group that we hadn't anticipated. But the adoption piece, I found they welcome the technology, but the adoption and then learning from it is really about knowing your audience and making sure to give them what they need.
So something we talk about a lot, Chris, in our circles of XR practitioners is the complexities around just the mechanics of managing and deploying and scaling, XR. I mean, what have you run into around, going from 2 headsets to 20 or more? I mean, how tough has that been for you to manage the actual devices and software and technology as you start to grow this?
Quite.
Yeah. Not surprised. We all agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you said scale up, I got a little stressed out, actually. From my perspective, it's been the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because doing the pilot, you can bootstrap it. You can get your little team of people who care about this and have a common vision, 2, 3, 4 of you.
Yeah.
You can use the small enough budget that you have approval to purchase on your own, those budget limits or whatever. You can do that, and you can create your little pilot experience in isolation, which is not bad, which is great, because that's the early innovators.
Sure.
That's helping to gain a foothold in the organization. That's helping you learn and struggle. And so I feel like we're experts at doing pilots, and my group would agree we're not experts yet at scaling up. But what I've learned about scaling up, the key is broad buy-in. It's not going to be Chris who scales up XR at my organization. It's going to be the organization. It's going to be all of us. There's a reason why we have trainers, sales reps, IT, finance, marketing. There's a reason why a large organization has all those functions, because they're all critical and they're all necessary. And if you remove a single one, the whole thing falls apart. And so having all of those teams together is really important, because they can answer the questions that I can't answer. So I'm an educator, and that's great. I can answer some things, but when it comes to device security, yeah. I'm totally lost. I have no idea. Sanitation, sourcing new vendors. We're not just going to our normal vendors that we work with now. We're having to discover brand new vendors. We've got to create new types of content that we haven't created before.
Yeah.
We've got to manage the hardware and the inventory, both on site, how we deploy it, how we get it back. Once it gets to the location, we work in hospitals. So oftentimes you can't get a Wi-Fi signal inside a cath lab or in a procedure room that's underground, or with lead-lined walls, because you're using X-ray and they're protected against the radiation. We have to deal with protected personal information and make sure that we're following all HIPAA rules, that we're not transmitting anything, and that could be stolen or lost in the process or stored somewhere that's not as secure. You got to answer questions about budget. These are budgets that don't exist. So that's why you need the whole organization. You need everyone to look and say, we have to create a new budget category, or we have to not just do this because it's fun or innovative, but because it will add value. And so it's worth taking budget from somewhere else. Yeah. What happens when their stuff breaks? You got to deal with IT help desk type stuff. You got to deal with the changing technology. I don't know what the next headset is, but there are people in my organization that do. And so bringing all of us together, that broad buy-in, that's my number one advice for anyone who's done 12 pilots and is on their 13th, or who hasn't yet and is trying to figure out where to start. That if you want to scale, that's going to be critical.
You know, Scott and I get asked a lot about, how do you prepare for a job in XR? And so when we tell people that there's not really a background that sets you up super well for the background in XR, or necessarily is tailored to, I think that's maybe frustrating sometimes, because it's a little more loose than what people would like. But if I had to say there's a skill set to have, if you're going to be an XR practitioner in a business, it would be just building relationships with people that are multidisciplinary. Because to your point, like this takes a village. There's no, Dane setting up VR for everybody. It's like, this is a full company kind of effort in adoption. And then also, we've had use cases where, like, our accounting team has come up to us and said, "Hey, it'd be great if we could do this." And it's like, man, from an ops perspective, I would have never thought about that as a potential use case. And so not only do you get the benefit of all the experts across the business helping to apply things, but I think it also expands the scope of what the capability could provide to the business overall. And one thing we found is that for those that are getting started, if you get some headsets and you get a good first use case, then the barrier to entry for the second is lower, because you have headsets, you're managing the devices, and that's a lot of the battle. And so I'm interested if you kind of have the same experience where you feel like you were able to seed the ground with the seeds, and then when the first ones popped up, was there more kind of demand afterwards, or have you guys had to be more kind of calculated, I guess, in the way that you're moving forward with the trainings?
Yes, it takes a village, and it takes those folks who are piloting, who are taking the risk.
Mm-hmm.
What I learned was, I'm not the only one who's taken that risk, and my team, we're not the only ones who've done that. For us, we're other teams around the organization who also took that risk, also piloted, and recently we found each other, and by finding each other, that's helped us to go to the rest of the organization and show our success over here, their success over there, and come together and start to try to scale up. My team just 2 days ago, they were all together doing a multi-year strategy session on XR to say, what's our plan for the next several years? And even though I'm part of one business unit at Abbott called Vascular, we have dozens of business units across medical devices and nutritionals and diagnostics and pharmaceuticals, and it's all across the board. We came together, starting kind of with our vascular group, but invited some of those others who also have been seeding in their own respective areas, and did this joint session. We also had participation from a central corporate team who's looking at this as well. And that team was really critical, and they're excellent partners for us. And so all of us who were doing our little pilots have come together, and yes, I think it does, in our respective areas, soften some folks up to see the value of it. But also, we're realizing that it's more than a trickle. There's a little miniature tidal wave, and when we all come together, and that's been really helpful. The other thing I would say, Dane, is that you asked how we measure success before, and I talked about moving people along that learning curve, but we also do measure success with data. So if in our first experience, we had a tool that was a VR tool that was used for a sales rep to educate a physician. And typically they might do that through traditional in-servicing, but instead of doing a traditional in-service, they use this tool. And their respondents said that they were retaining the information better. They had 70% higher retention of information. They were 50% more engaged than the traditional in-servicing. They were 50% more excited than a traditional in-service. And so those are some simple metrics, and you can get a lot more intense there. But even having a couple data points like that, I think, is also key to scaling up. The proof's in the pudding.
No, that's yeah. Well, and I hope that extends beyond, you know, just the walls of Abbott as well, right? Like, part of the goal of this podcast, and, you know, we can't tell you how much we appreciate you being on and sharing your knowledge, you know, with us as well. But part of the goal for us is, because this is difficult and it takes a village, like, let's get together and start talking about what each other are doing, you know, in the space. And I call Scott on a regular basis, and I'm like, hey, this HoloLens is giving me trouble. What do I do? And Scott's like, oh, you know, reset it, or, you know, we use this particular tool, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's really nice to have that kind of external support system as well of people who are actually doing the stuff. And some of it's like a group therapy session sometimes too with everybody. But no, it's really cool to see, like, where the industry is going, and you know, the technology, how it's developing. Is there, you know, I'm going to go out on the limb and ask the scary question, which is, where do you think this stuff's going, like, in the next 5 years, or what are the things that are exciting to you about where this space is going?
I think no one knows.
Yep.
But if
Dane does.
No.
Yeah, just tell us, Dane, please.
Yeah, Scott's put me on the hook, but I don't know anything, so I'm going to defer to Chris.
There are some possibilities. In just my perspective, I don't consider myself an expert here, but as I listen to others who've shared some insightful thoughts, one that constantly comes up is enterprise first. That there's a lot of stuff in the news about, you know, how good or not Mark Zuckerberg might look in the metaverse, and many people think of the metaverse as the place where we go to play games and do fun things. But the enterprise first, that strikes me as accurate. That enterprise is the first place that the metaverse will come to us, because you have very focused use cases. Mm-hmm. And you have these controlled situations. You have usually controlled audiences that are tightly targeted. And so the value can be precisely identified in an enterprise use case, versus trying to make a game that is interesting to 300 million people. Mm-hmm. Is not quite as targeted. So I think that could be part of it. I think also, it's not just about the technologies like the goggles and the glasses, but it's going to be about an interface of multiple technologies. Mm-hmm. It's going to be about the Internet of Things. And it's not just going to be goggles and phones, but there will be the thing that we all have on our desk. Mm-hmm. Many years ago, a desk was the place that you wrote stuff on. You know, that's for your pen and your notepad. And now it's not. Some people don't even have space to write something. It's the place that you put your monitors. Mm-hmm. And even more so now, it's the place that you put your monitors, but oftentimes people have that little stand for their iPhone as well, because they got to do quick, you know, video conferencing. And I imagine your guys' desks have all sorts of gadgets on them, and yep. Just, right within arm's reach. There you go. So I think this whole idea of, like, the Internet of Things, 5G, artificial intelligence, to help create experiences that are relevant for me personally. I think all those are going to come together. And I mean, there are instances in the past where you have some enabling technology like the transistor, but it's not really about the transistor. It's about computers and smartphones, or, you know, they made improvements in making steel, but it wasn't just about making steel stronger. It was about skyscrapers and railroads and telegraph lines and things like that. So I think that's another thing to look out for. And then I think about where the future is for healthcare in particular. I think that's part of the answer. I think healthcare will be in healthcare, and for a couple of reasons. First, because the physicians, really physicians who have to know so much and be constantly current, they need to be constantly talking to other smart people and connected with other physicians, people who are experts in their field. And it's not always enough to do a phone call or to read a peer-reviewed paper in black and white where all the data is crunched into really small text. You might need an experience, or you might need to say, hey, jump into my lab, my cath lab here in Seoul, South Korea, real quickly for a few minutes to see what I'm doing. And this is what I'm talking about. And that picture paints 1,000 words. And then in healthcare, I think also for patients, we have already started doing some work for patients as well. So we have a number of devices and machines, diagnostic instruments that test blood for safety. And so we test a lot of the blood that's in the global blood supply that's donated. But there's essentially a shortage now. Younger people are not donating as much as prior generations were. So average age of donation is 55. And in order to help get over that, some of my colleagues did some research and figured out that one of the main reasons that people aren't donating blood is needle phobia. They're afraid of someone sticking a needle in their arm, and they don't want to go through that experience. And so they looked at a couple of XR solutions, and one they came up with was a mixed reality solution that you put on the glasses while you're sitting in the chair donating blood, and you're greeted by this peaceful orb named Willow that invites you to plant some seeds in this virtual garden. And since your arm is immobilized because you're donating blood, you use your eyes to pick up the seeds out of a satchel and plant them. And then they all bloom into this really magnificent garden. So you're giving life to this garden while you're giving life to another human being at the same time.
Wow.
And it helps to encourage this positive thing. And if you were to go into a blood donation center, you'd probably think that was really cool and innovative. But in the future, that might just be what blood donation centers are. It might just be a normal part of it. So I think healthcare will also be at the tip of the spear, and I hope to be a part of that.
So I know I've talked to you about this before, Chris, but in my college years, I thought I wanted to go to med school, and so my background was biomedical engineering, and I did all the tests and all that stuff, and then I thought to myself, like, man, I don't want to be here for the next 15 years, to get my MD. Like, do you think that there's a potential for technology like this to help certainly enhance the process, but like help speed up the process where, potentially you could, because you have such richer, educational experiences or something, you could speed that process up? Because I imagine there's going to be, like every other industry, I imagine that there's probably a shortage of doctors as well.
I think it will. Some med schools are already doing this. Some hospitals and institutions are already doing this for their staff. And the data show that it does accelerate the learning process, and not only accelerate it, but gives you higher quality as well. So when you actually do that procedure for the first time, it's not the first time, it's the second time or the 50th time that you've done that procedure. Yes, I think that is, I think that's a very, very central use case. And it gets you from the theoretical book learning to the real practical learning. My school's motto was learn by doing. And I always felt that was so relevant. There's one physician that who I consider to be a great partner for us. And he's done some surveys of fellows where he asks them about a certain technology. How many of you are comfortable and competent on this technology? And 70%, 80%, 90%. And then he's taken them through actually doing it in a simulated environment and found out that, well, the numbers are more like 20%, 30%, 40%. So yes, when you say there, I mean, we need good doctors. We need more doctors. And I think it could be a real central part to that.
Do you guys have any, and sorry, Scott, I'm kind of commandeering this whole conversation. I'll ask one more question and then I'll throw it over to Scott for more. But do you, like, this is fascinating to me.
Oh, Dane loves this stuff, by the way. Thank you for coming on, Chris, because
Yeah.
he wants to talk to me about healthcare stuff all the time. And I'm like, oh, gosh, okay.
Dan, if you need a fix, just text me.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. No, like, well, so like one of the things that we find in manufacturing is people, come in and they go through the VR experiences and then they go, maybe I'm not as well cut out for this particular job. Maybe it's, something's too high for me to reach, or, something like that. Do you guys, or have you seen yet with like fellows where, maybe somebody thought they wanted to be an anesthesiologist and then they go through the experience and they're like, man, once I try this, this real experience, like maybe I want to be an orthopedic surgeon or, something like that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. You would have made a great doctor. That's a really great insight. I've not seen that in my experience, but I have heard when talking to some doctors where they say things like, when I did my nephrology rotation, or I did my wound care rotation, I realized I don't want to do that. And so, like all of us have had those experiences. You try something out, and if you can close a door, that's just as critical as being able to open another door for someone's career or your just life happiness. So I do know that's the reality for when doctors have gone through actual experiences. Fortunately, no doctor has decided to quit after doing any of our XR, but I think that's very insightful, and I wonder, it's going to make me think now about, as we look at our hiring profile for new employees, and if you can make that decision soon and help the new employee jointly make that decision with you soon, or the prospective employee even, that it's not the right fit, that's a win-win. They're not going to work at a company they don't want to work at, and you're not going to get the person who doesn't feel like it's the right thing for them.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of a cool thought, to shift earlier that decision making, rather than we trained you, we invested in you, and at 12 months you told us it's not the right place for you.
So being part of the XR at Work family now, Mr. McGlone, right? So being on the podcast and we love meeting new folks. The big reason why Dane and I started this podcast was because we wanted to provide insight like yours to others who are in similar situations. We've not had anyone from the healthcare side on the show, so thank you again. This is terrific. But I mean, as you think about new people, because we exist to try and help new practitioners in XR, give them a sense for there's other people's going through this. People have experienced some of the issues they're facing. Kind of maybe sometimes some advice on how to start up or some pitfalls to look out for. I mean, if you could say something to our audience around, what should they keep in mind getting into XR in the enterprise side of things, what would your guidance be? Kind of what's your tips for new men and women getting into situations like ours where they're going to start championing XR in their enterprise? What's your advice there?
This is a very collegial community. That's my read. That as I entered this community, one of my instant realizations was everyone wants to help. And it might be because we're all prior to the chasm and we're all the innovators and early adopters, at least in this regard. And so we're excited about it, and we can see past that chasm and we can see what the future holds. And we know that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so we want to help everyone succeed. So that is a word of encouragement, that it is a collegial community. And you guys have been really incredible. You've answered some great questions for me. You've connected me with other thought leaders in this space. And so it really is just a great feeling. Scott, you and I met in person for the first time at the AES, Augmented Enterprise Summit. a few months ago, and that was great too, because I got that sense there. Everyone wanted to share, everyone wanted to brainstorm. I was able to connect with other colleagues within healthcare, and we shared ideas back and forth and talked about our common struggles. So that'd be the first piece of advice. For those who are committed or want to commit now, I think some of the things we talked about are relevant. So you want to focus on your user first. You want to focus on getting that right use case, and then allow the technology to overlay on top of that. So if it's someone who's, let's say it's for education, like what I do, if someone's in the awareness phase of something, the solution might not be a high-end multi-$100,000 solution. It might be a 360 video that they can watch on their phone, which they already own. Or if it's you might need to take someone a little further down that learning curve through some emotional experience, like firing Barry or something like that.
Or Barry.
I'm sure he's probably found a better place.
I'm sure.
So yeah, finding that right use case, and then you can pilot, but also knowing you're going to have to get that broad buy-in. There's not going to be any secret silver bullet that you come up with on your own, and then everyone gives you awards for. It's going to be the whole team, all of the departments, everyone working together, and the organization has to align to it. And I don't know if this is maybe not the right guidance, but I also believe it might not be the right time for some organizations and some people. And I might advise that you wait 3 or 4 years until you can get the off-the-shelf solution that is easy and low cost. I mean, how many different types of hardware have you guys gone through in the last 3 or 4 years?
I don't want to talk about it.
Too much, man.
And so some organizations can't afford or shouldn't afford that. And you should just wait until someone's built this real easy solution. Some people back in the 90s needed a car phone or a cell phone. But that was a real special circumstance. Just wait until everybody can get one really easily, and it's going to work out as well. So that could be a solution too.
I think that's very sage advice, and
it's good advice, man.
Yeah, and there you don't hear a lot of people that would say, maybe it's not for you, but I think that's that's an honest evaluation that I think everybody in the space needs to have. And I think we even, internally when we bring on tools, like we have to think about that consistently too. Like, is this still the right thing for us to be doing? Even if we've been doing it for the last, couple years. So that's a great insight.
Chris, any questions for us or anything you want to discuss that maybe we haven't talked about today?
Well, you guys, wow, you're the experts. Let's go. We could go for another 40 minutes here with questions. Do you have any? I guess which of the things that I shared resonate the most with you? That you've also seen or you've heard other people? Because if we can get some synchronicity with some other opinions, that'd be good.
Well, so one thing that you triggered in me when you said artificial intelligence, as part of the ecosystem of technologies that will support this stuff. I don't know if you've had a chance to try the OpenAI GPT, like the Chat GPT that just came out like last week. It's a new AI chatbot that they created, but I've been playing with it, and the thing that, like, the circular thought that I keep having is like, imagine soft skills training with an AI where you can have an open conversation. It doesn't even have to be structured, right? It could just be, hey, how are you today? Good. Let's talk about, whatever. And it's trained on all of the internal content of a business. And it's literally just like you have a real kind of face-to-face conversation with an AI, and it feels like a real discussion, going on. It feels like that would be so impactful, even for like patients, right? So not even trying to teach people something, but, somebody's in hospice and, need a soothing companion. Like they're like the the overlap of those two technologies strike me as being a very, very impactful one. And I don't think we've even, as far as like anybody in the space, I don't think we've even brushed the surface of that yet. But that was just a thought, that you piqued when you mentioned artificial intelligence, because it's a timely thing. But I'm trying to think about this as an ecosystem of technologies, and also, what different levels of development or maturity do you have to have in each of these in order to achieve specific use cases, and then grow those use cases over time as that happens. And so I think that's one of the things that struck me as we were talking is you mentioned, this is my summary, like, don't do VR for VR's sake, like make sure that you're doing VR for a reason. And I think that's really a very important piece of what we do, is making sure that we're not just doing cool technology because it's cool.
Absolutely. We looked at a solution that someone pitched to us one time that was kind of a virtual scenario of practicing conversations with, it might be a sales rep talking to a doctor, or it might be a doctor talking to a patient. And when we continued asking more questions and pressing them on it, it turned out that, well, you just try to pre-map all of the possible conversations, and that's just not possible. I mean, that's not how the world works. And so if versus an AI that's creating those paths as needed is, I think that would apply across all industries, because everyone needs to talk to people and practice productive, positive communication.
Well, and from my perspective in the manufacturing space, we have a lot of folks that are retiring that are 30, 40-year veterans. They're the original connected worker, right? It's just that everything is in their head as opposed to in the devices that they wear or use on a consistent basis. And I think about, like, if you could download everything that person knows, like, maybe it's their email inbox, and now it's getting a little bit creepy, but promise there's a point. Like, if you could download everything that person knows and essentially reference that subject matter expert after they've retired, like, what a powerful experience that you could allow people to have in conversation and all that stuff. So sorry, I'm getting kind of out in the left field here, but
no, I'd ask that question. So my next follow-up question would be, what, thanks for coming on to my podcast, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime.
What are the most innovative or most dramatic or most inspiring ideas that you guys have heard as you've talked to other people on this podcast or just in other conversations? I mean, maybe that was it, because that was pretty darn inspiring. But
yeah, well, so some of the more inspiring things that I've seen happen in healthcare, because the people that are getting healthcare are in kind of dire situations usually, right? And so, there was a study, I think maybe Stanford Med did it or something, where they were talking about like people who are in hospice, on a hospital bed, they'd put them in VR, and they could actually like reduce the pain essentially that people were feeling without actually giving them pain medication, because you're effectively distracting them from the situation that they're in. Like, that's super inspiring to me, because I think anything you can do to kind of maximize comfort in that scenario is really valuable to obviously the person experiencing it, but I mean also the family and everybody else. And then the concept of kind of replicating the ability to ask questions of a person without physically asking them questions, I think is crazy impactful too. Like, if you could take every every writing from a person and create an AI that would respond as that person, like that's crazy. You could have George Washington that you're asking questions about, whatever. Like, I don't know. It's just the expanse of that, I think, is incredible. So sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No. I'm just thinking. I was thinking. So I have a daughter who's studying to be an audiologist, and the glasses that just came out, that will listen to someone that you're in front of, and it will give you closed captioning of what they're saying, so you can read what they're saying if you're deaf. I mean, that kind of hits close to home because our family has a real interest in sign language and the deaf or audibly impaired folks, and so I just think there's really neat stuff. I mean, making some of the stuff that Dane, you or I make in our day jobs, in our factories, it's cool. It's not as cool as some of the healthcare stuff. It's like, man, there's really a lot of use cases to explore in healthcare that I think get to be super interesting, and it's only going to get more interesting as we go along. We start to incorporate AI and some of the other stuff. I think we got some neat times on the horizon with relation to emerging technology and healthcare. It's just going to get cooler and cooler and more valuable. Yeah.
I agree.
Well, we really appreciate you being here and interviewing us, Chris, and letting us give you our thoughts this afternoon. But I'm assuming that you're like us and you're down if people want to reach out to you to talk about your experience in XR and kind of what and use you as part of their network. We'd certainly encourage you, like we do everyone, to just continue on with the networking and being there for others. And so thank you for being a part of our network.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It's a great honor. I'd be happy to get in touch with anybody who has any questions or interests or wants to just share ideas.
Terrific. Well, we appreciate everyone for listening today. Our guest, Chris McGlone on XR at Work. Dane, thanks for being here again. And I'm glad you finally got someone who agreed with your question about will XR shorten the time of physician training and education. So that's good.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
You're validated. Be sure you hit the like and subscribe. Check out new episodes coming up of XR at Work over the winter time. We are not traveling and it's cold outside, so we're going to record some more episodes, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.